Ooh. Okay, so welcome to office hours for AP Micro Unit 3 Part 1. My name is Shreya. Y'all already know that. And you can find Fiveable at Think Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And we also have a TikTok, which is pretty fun. And today we're going to be covering like the first half of Unit 1. So that basically means we're going to be doing the production function, costs in the short run and long run, the types of profits, and profit maximization. So before we even start, do you have any questions that you want to get out of the way before I start, or should I just like review the content first? Either one is fine for me. Okay, I'll just go ahead with the content review then. One second. Okay, so yeah, the chat wasn't showing for some reason. Okay, so the production function basically relates inputs and outputs in the short run and the long run. So there are 4 bolded terms in that bullet point. So basically inputs are any kind of like resources that you use to produce a certain good or service. And that also includes like employees or workers. And outputs are the actual like product, like the good or service that you get out of a firm. And then the short run basically means it's like a period of time where at least one resource is fixed. So that means like either the plant size, so the factory size where the good is produced is fixed, so you can't expand it in the short run and things like that. And basically in the long run, there are no limits, so all resources are flexible. And yeah, like you can change the factory size in the long run, you can increase the amount of inputs that you get shipped in to produce a certain output. And yeah, the long run is just when everything is flexible. And of course, there's costs and revenues involved in this process. So costs are like the things that the firm has to pay. So like wages, the costs for any inputs that they need, etc. And then revenues is the money that like a firm gets out of it. So like the formula for revenue at least is price times quantity. So the price of the good times how much they actually sell. And this table kind of just like shows everything, like the total product, average product, and marginal product. So basically total product is like how much of the good is produced, and the average product divides the total product by the number of inputs that are needed. And in this table, the number of inputs is basically the number of workers. And marginal product is the additional like increase in total product for each additional input. So like on this table, when there's like 1 worker, there's 15 for the total product, but when there's 2 workers, it's 34. So the marginal would be 15 minus 0 for the first worker, and then 34 minus 15 for the second worker. And then the average product would be 15 divided by 1 for 1 worker, and then 34 divided by 2 for 2 workers. And then the stages of returns, I'll do that on the next slide. So basically these are the stages of returns. Those lines are not straight, I just realized that. But basically there's like 3 different stages, and this graph kind of shows how like as inputs increase, like how the total product, average product, and marginal product change as you increase inputs. So the first stage is increasing marginal returns. So that basically means that marginal product is increasing, And this causes total product to increase at an increasing rate. So the slope is like steep on the total product line here. And this is because there's specialization. So like as you get more inputs up to like a certain point, people can differentiate their roles. So like if we were talking about making pizza, like one person could make the dough, one person could put on the toppings, and one person could be doing the baking, things like that. But when you get to decreasing marginal returns, marginal product starts to decrease here. So total product is still increasing, but it's like a less steep slope now. And this is because there's fixed resources. So this whole graph is like in the scope of fixed resources, by the way. So like, again, going back to the pizza example, once you get up to like a certain amount of workers, there's only a limited amount of resources. So like there's only enough, like a certain amount of dough that people can like make, and there's only a certain amount of toppings that people can use to make pizzas, and there's only a certain number of ovens that people can use to bake the pizzas. So that's when decreasing marginal returns and diminishing marginal utility actually sets in here as well, because marginal cost starts to like increase. And lastly, there's negative marginal returns. So marginal product actually is negative now, which decreases total product. And this is because like workers start to get in the way of each other. When there's too many workers, obviously like they clash and there's not enough space for all of them. And yeah. And there are some short run production costs here. So there's quite a few of them. So fixed costs are costs that don't depend on the amount of a good that's being produced. So like wages, rent, insurance, things like that, those are all fixed costs because it doesn't really matter how much of a good or service that you produce, those costs will be the same. And then variable costs are the exact opposite. So they do depend on how much of a good that you do produce. So like, I don't know, like input costs are usually variable because the amount of inputs you need depends on the amount of outputs that you produce. And then total cost is the sum of the fixed costs plus variable costs, which is highlighted in this equation. And then there's average fixed cost, which is total fixed costs, which is the first one divided by the quantity. And then average variable costs is the total variable costs divided by quantity. And then average total cost is total cost divided by quantity, or AFC plus ABC. And then marginal cost is the additional cost that it costs a firm to produce like each additional unit of a good. So basically all of these terms, are demonstrated on this table. You can see that the fixed cost stays the same because they're fixed. It's 200 no matter what the output is. And you can see that the variable cost increases as you increase the output because, again, like as you need more inputs, as you want to produce more outputs, you also need more inputs. And then total cost is just the sum of those two columns. And then average fixed cost is when you start dividing things. So like 200 divided by 1 gets you the average fixed cost for 1 unit, and then 200 divided by 2 is 100, so on. And then same for the other two columns. And then you can see the marginal cost is, you just do the total cost and then minus the total cost of the unit that you're looking for minus the total cost of the previous unit. And another thing that I want to mention, when output is 0 on these tables, that you still have to pay the fixed cost. It doesn't matter if you're not producing anything, you're still paying a fixed cost, but obviously your variable cost is 0. So marginal cost for 1 unit would be 215 minus 200, which is 15, and then for 2 units, 220 minus 215, and so on. And these graphs basically just show how those like different types of costs look on a graph. They're called cost curves. And this one shows our like total costs. So it shows total cost, total variable costs, and total fixed costs. And fixed costs are, it's like a linear, oh yeah. For some reason, it's not letting me see the chat, which is really weird.
So on the y-axis there, what is P-C?
It's like price or cost, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, the price or cost of a good. And then Q is quantity. So you can see that the distance between the total cost curve and the variable cost curve is constant, and the distance between them is actually fixed costs because they stay the same. And variable cost plus fixed cost is total cost. And then on this graph, it shows the marginal cost and all the average cost curves. So for the average fixed cost, you can see that it like starts getting smaller and smaller. And this is actually shown on this table as well, because fixed costs stay the same, but the quantity, as you increase the quantity, what you're dividing 200 by gets bigger and bigger, which results in a smaller and smaller fixed cost, which is why this keeps getting smaller and smaller over time. And then variable costs start to increase over time at a certain point, so do total costs. And if you like look at, if like the x-axis had like individual quantity markings on them, you could like see the average fixed cost when you find the distance between the average total cost and the average variable cost. I hope that sentence made sense, because AVC plus AFC is ATC, so the vertical distance between the two curves at each individual quantity is the AFC at each individual quantity. And yeah, the marginal cost curve basically intersects the AVC and the ATC at their lowest points. And it is downward sloping at the beginning because of the increasing marginal returns, but when diminishing marginal utility starts to set in, so as each additional input generates less and less output, that's when the marginal cost curve starts to slope upwards. And changes in fixed costs can affect, fixed and variable costs can affect different things. So changes in fixed costs affects AFC and ATC because, of course, AFC involves fixed costs and ATC involves fixed costs as well, because ATC is AFC plus AVC. And fixed costs could be a thing like a lump sum tax or subsidy. So that like adds on a certain amount that you have to pay. And changes in variable costs, so things like per unit taxes or subsidies, can affect AVC, ATC, and marginal cost. And of course, AVC and ATC are pretty self-explanatory, and then marginal cost is like a per unit thing as well. So any variable cost change also affects marginal costs. And these are some long production costs. So this red curve right here is the LRATC, or the long run ATC. And basically it's made up of individual SRATCs, or short run average total cost curves. So that's basically what this graph is. And there's like 3 distinct sections on this graph. So the first one would be economies of scale. So basically, as a firm increases production, the ATC actually decreases in the economies of scale period. And this is because mass production and specialization happens. So it's better to actually increase output to get a lower ATC. And then you reach the constant returns to scale, which is when, as you increase output, ATC stays the same, basically. So ATC is going to be the lowest here. And once you start producing too much, you reach the diseconomies of scale. So it's better to stop to lower production here. And basically, as you produce more, ATC increases at this like period of time. And that's because like usually it gets too big to manage, and your firm or your like factory isn't big enough to handle that level of production. And there are
Like-
different types. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So what is an economy of scale?
I don't know the exact definition because I'm pretty sure it's like it's just like referred to as a section of the LRATC, but
Okay, that's
um
good enough for me then.
yeah, I think like the scale part refers to like the scale of production, like how much you're producing. Yeah, I hope that helps. I can like search it up later. I don't know the exact like wording of it. And yeah, these are the types of profits. So to get to profits, first we need to look at costs. So there are explicit costs and implicit costs. So explicit costs are like out-of-pocket things. So like what you pay to use the resources of others. So like wages, rent, electricity bills, like resource prices. And then implicit costs are opportunity costs that firms encounter when they are making production decisions. So let's say like I wanted to quit my job that paid $20,000 a year and go open a new business. My implicit cost for that decision would be $20,000 because I'm giving up a wage of $20,000 to start a new business. So basically things like foregone wage, or time, that's also an implicit cost. So that's the difference between those two. And then accounting costs only look at explicit costs, but economic costs, which is what we mainly use for economics, is explicit plus implicit costs. And firms look at economic costs more than they look at accounting costs. And accounting profits are your total revenue minus your accounting costs, and then economic profits are total revenue minus economic costs. And then normal profit is basically when you break even. So that's essentially when your economic profit is equal to zero. So your total revenue is equal to the sum of your explicit plus your implicit costs. And when you're breaking even, or when you're making a normal profit, your accounting profit is still positive. And lastly, we have profit maximization. This is a really important rule to know because it applies in the future units as well, like when we talk about different types of market structures. And the profit maximizing point is when MR equals MC, so marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And these two tables show that pretty well. A lot of the time, like College Board likes to give you just like total revenue and then total cost, and then you kind of like solve for marginal revenue and marginal cost on your own, which is not too hard because you just do the subtraction that we talked about. And you're looking for the quantity where MR equals MC. And in this case, that would be 3 because MR is 7 and MC is 7. Yeah, any questions?
So when you're talking about MR equals MC, why would it not be better for your revenue to be greater than your costs, like at output number 2?
It's because you're trying Huh. Okay, I think my Wi-Fi disconnected real quick there. I will
Yeah,
switch.
and then you cut out.
Yeah, I figured that would happen sometime. Um, but as I was saying, like at this quantity of three, your profits are kind of like at their peak. But if you produce anything more than that or less than that, you're not making as much profit as you could. So like if you made an output of two, your revenues would be higher than your costs, but you could be making more profit because if you produced an extra unit, you could sell that extra unit and make the revenue from that as well. If that makes
Oh, okay. So is that like looking back at long run average total cost, like when it gets to the perfect point in the middle? Like the
Yeah, pretty
same type of
much.
thing? Okay.
And also like they don't really talk about LRATC that much. I don't see it that much like in multiple choice or FRQs. It's mostly just SRATC, which is usually just called ATC. And yeah, and just curious, have you like looked at perfect competition yet? Like, have you studied up to that point?
Yes. Wait, am I unmuted? Sorry. Yes, I am. Sorry. Then the answer is yes.
Yay, that's good. Yeah, I think you're going at a good pace.
Yeah. I'm taking macro in school next semester.
Ooh, fun.